Good afternoon. I'm Miriam Grace Go, Rappler editor, and you are watching Newsbreak Chats. Newsbreak Chats is our huddle with Rappler journalists where we share insights, analysis, inside stories about the issues we've tackled in our in-depth reports. June 2022 was a month of transition. We came out with a series of assessments about what the Duterte administration did or did not do for several sectors. We also closely followed how Ferdinand Marcos Jr. prepared to assume the presidency and what direction he has set in his first full week in office. Joining me today are our Malacanang reporters, old and new. We're going through our own transition of sorts that way. Pia Ranada, who covered Rodrigo Duterte, and Bea Cupin, who is covering Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Pia and Bea will talk to us about the good and bad that Marcos has inherited from Duterte. So quickly, ladies, the good and the bad.
Okay, I can start. Siguro the bad for me under the Duterte administration would be the erosion of certain democratic guardrails. So alam naman natin na during Duterte's time, very maanghang yung salita niya for critics, for opposition, even for media, and even if parang we get that may personal grudge against these people, as president, you're expected to respect like the civility that these institutions command, because obviously parang if you want to retain like the freedom of speech and dissent, you have to be able to respect different opinions. And si Duterte talagang, he really threatened critics, he really attacked media, journalists, and that made a lot of other politicians and officials feel like they can be just as onion-skinned. So nakita natin parang mas common yung attacking media even down the line, not just him, but parang it was more acceptable now to attack anyone who you don't agree with.
Yung very quick and lazy na response yung imbis na magpaliwanag ng side nila or ng issues is fake news kayo. Diba?
Kaya imbes na mag-explain, sumisigaw ka na lang without actually explaining.
Yeah, or listening.
Listening what you... to add to Pia din siguro, no, parang beyond what happened in the 6 years, to me, yung lasting cultural impact in politics Duterte, like ngayon pa lang 2022 elections, right? We're seeing dynasties consolidate their power, invento kong term, yung nationalization of dynasties in the Philippines. Pinakamalaking example doon, the vice president is his daughter. We haven't heard that happen in Philippine politics. I mean, normal yung anak na aakyat din eventually. Pero eventually, hindi yung
literally
literally back. And to think, muntikan pa siyang tumakbo ng presidente if she listened to the clamor of his allies. So, to me, that's a huge, parang malaking impact yun. Tapos parang I remember in the story that I wrote about Duterte in Mindanao, parang yung isang sinabi ni Carlos Conde, parang his words were kahadlok, oy, nakakatakot isipin, na normalize na nga. Yung ganong language, rhetoric that translates into blood on the street. So, when people see that it not only did it elect him into power, but it kept him in power, and he exited as the most popular president in post-EDSA Philippines, no? So, parang politicians will see that and say, oh, it's working. It worked for him. It might work for me. Not even for 2022, 2025, but like, I don't know, 20 years from now, 30, diba? Someone might draw inspiration from that.
In fact, 2019 pa lang na elections, midterm, we pointed that out na lahat ng tactics ng kampanya at local politics, and everything parochial na nag-consolidate ng power ni Duterte sa Davao, itinaas niya, ni-nationalize, naging national yung scale.
Tsaka let's not forget, in the 2019 elections, Duterte used a very unique tactic of his na narco politicians list, diba? Like 2019 yun, March 2019, a few months lang before elections. Bagong tactic yun na to label your opponents as, drug criminals or something. Yeah. So yun, that was really used against certain political figures.
At hindi lang ginamit sa local na kalaban, but yung tinakot yung mga local na, so dadalhin ko yung kandidato ni Duterte sa national kasi baka ako yung mapapunta sa narco list, diba? Nagkaroon ng ganung. How will this work for or against Marcos kung ito yung culture na shape during Duterte's time?
Well, he won as the first post-EDSA majority president kumbaga, I don't know if he deliberately did it or like he just rode the tide na parang, di ba, it all worked to his advantage, you know. Parang alam ko yung resistance ngayon ng mga pro-Marcos vloggers or commentators is, no, parang Duterte didn't hand him the presidency. But we're not saying it in a literal terms, na parang pinasa yung corona ni Duterte to President Marcos. Now, he paved the way for that. Sinakyan ni Marcos yung nationalization nga of dynasties, like the Marcos dynasty.
The dynasties delivered for Marcos.
Yeah, and their own dynasty, right? They're the ruling power, like mas dominant sila ngayon sa Ilocos Norte compared to previous elections. His son will be entering Congress for the first time, representing at maganda yung opisina ni Sandro Marcos based on his story. Anyway, sorry, minor, pero it tells you the importance of a legislator kung maganda yung opisina niya.
Yung pag-demonize din sa opposition, no, na ginawa ni Duterte.
The biggest boon Duterte gave to Marcos. Kasi ngayon, he had one less problem to worry about. Right? The opposition is so weak, they didn't even win in the 2019 elections, like in the senatorial race. So, diba, he could really focus on new messaging that's fresh. And also, I really think that Duterte's divisiveness also allowed Marcos to be this kind of refreshing taste na, uy, bago to kasi unity, ayaw niya bumanat sa kalaban. Si Duterte, diba, parang puro banat. So in a way, different continuity candidate siya, si Marcos. But at the same time, different flavor siya na yung mga Pilipino na umay na dun sa politics ni Duterte can latch onto that but still expect like a Duterte candidate in a way.
Which is interesting to me kasi attempt din yun noong 2016 ni Lenny actually and Mar Rojas din. Parang continuity kami pero no, level up continuity. It didn't work. Obviously, nanalo si Duterte. Pero first time to at least in modern, more, when I say modern, in the scope of me being a reporter at least, no? Na parang yun nga, ang interesting ng play nila na we are continuity candidates, but we have distanced ourselves from the baggage.
Interesting yung ginamit na word ni Pia, yung naging refreshing si Bongbong kasi divisive si Duterte, siya is unity yung message. Tapos di ba in our chat sinasabi niyo na even yung I don't know, yung routine ni Bongbong, even the way he conducts himself, the way he conducts meetings and all, parang sa sobrang mababa na standards ba na iniwan ni Duterte or yung practices niya. Biglang ang galing ni Bongbong ngayon sa tingin mo, di ba?
Because he's early. He's on time.
Very basic things. Kasi sobrang chaotic ng Duterte time.
Prepared siya sa meetings, alam mong nag-aral siya, alam mong nakinig siya dun sa mga taong kinonsult niya, no? Parang, tama ka, Bea. Basics ito, pero all of a sudden, we're so thankful that these are in place.
I had to check myself kasi his first official event as president was the Air Force na event of the anniversary. And then after his very short 7-minute speech na hindi ko sinasabi na empty in that walang kwenta, pero like walang pasabog. Like it was the usual niceties, celebrating the PAF. And then after I was like, so strange. Like, bakit walang controversial na sinabi? And then I was like, no, that's the normal thing. Presidents normally stick to the occasion. They don't insert other topics in the anniversary of the PAF, right?
And to think that same speech in Duterte's time, 2016 version ng PAF event, doon na niya in-announce yung 4 narco policemen na yun yung first narco list na minention niya. And he announced it in that PAF event, which is totally not related to the drug war, right? So you can really see how different they are.
Pagdating naman sa programs and priorities, ano ang good at bad? Wait, wala pala tayong sinabing good. Kanina, sa culture, sa political culture. Meron ba?
So, you wanna go?
For Duterte, meron naman. May good in the sense that Duterte really was very stubborn about populist policies, which till now are very popular, not just with the Duterte supporters, but across the board. Like yung free tertiary state education, sinay niya yun, despite his economic managers saying this is not sustainable. Yung universal healthcare, even common sense laws like increase the validity of passports, yung i-extend niya para hindi pila ng pila yung mga tao. Those kinds of things, they may sound simple and even common sense, but they were done in Duterte's time only. So it makes, parang you can really see a commitment of his, at least to lessen the suffering of people waiting in line. Parang I think totoo yung ganung kanyang grievance about those kinds of processes. And totoo yung kanyang wish to alleviate to a certain point yung mga financial burden sa mga tao.
Yun yung isip mayor na ni-nationalize na maganda ang nilabasan, di ba? Na parang meron kang pagkapa sa anong dinadaanan ng mga tao sa baba. Di ba?
No, which is definitely one of the biggest things that Marcos will have to. I mean, Pia can talk about this more kasi she's reporting on agriculture under the Marcos administration, diba na, yung nga, gusto ko yung line ni Pia, actually, yung literal gut issue that the Marcos administration has to address. And it's interesting nga na kinuha niya mismo yung portfolio. Rare siya in that the last two presidents didn't do that, taking on their own portfolio. So, pero it's a good thing lang, before we move on siguro. I still personally don't know how to approach this because to me, as a Mindanaoan myself, naramdaman ko noong 2016 yung hunger for representation. Like, not even just Mindanaoans, but even basta any Bisaya-speaking person. Kasi although we have had Bisaya politicians and presidents, some of them aren't really Bisaya in the sense na they trace their roots, but most of their time were spent either abroad or in Metro Manila. But it was the first time you actually saw yourself. And that's a whole different discussion, yung importance of representation. So I think that's a huge thing. And it's interesting to me na, you know, when you go to the ground, na ang laking bagay pa rin talaga for people to have heard their language being spoken in national speeches, even if kawawa yung non-Bisaya speaking media na based in Manila na parang
tayo nag-adjust.
Well, hindi ako nag-adjust. Pero I mean, nakatunga nga na lang kasi
nag-adjust ang newsroom.
Nag-Bisaya siya ng straight. Ayaw niya mag-Tagalog or mag-English. So, that's a huge thing. And then, what is interesting to me when I was doing the story for Mindanao ngayon nga na parang a lot of his major infrastructure promises for the region na why is Mindanao important because it's been so neglected through the years, lalo na when you talk about BARM, for example. But when you talk to the people on the ground, yung iniisip daw nila, hindi yung mga mega infra hindi yung mahabang
yung
highway, yung mga farm to road, napatayo yung barangay center nila sa wakas, parang siguro yung daan papunta sa sityo nila, naayos, parang to them, rightly or wrongly, when I say that, like, totoo bang kay Duterte, under the Duterte admin lang yung naplano, or baka naman that was like even...
Yan yung NTF-LCAC, I think
diba? Parang baka naman this was from,
program,
baka this is from 2 admins ago lang, ngayon lang na-implement. I mean, a lot of things. So parang to them, when you say build, maybe to us in Manila, a lot of us in Manila, a lot of us in national media, we think the major infra, but to them, build is these little projects na in their minds, again, correctly or wrongly,
nangyari during Duterte.
Only under Duterte nangyari. So,
kasi national yung build is, ilan yung bilang Nina Aika?
119 plus 12.
Out of 119, 12 lang yung natapos.
Yeah.
Pero yung mga sa barangay.
Na isa rin palang promise na kailangan, sabi ni President Marcos, tutuparin niya, i-continue. Ito rin yung continuity when convenient. I will continue the build program because it's effective. It was effectively marketed, I think. Diba?
Kasi everyone naman has infrastructure.
Yeah, every administration has major infrastructure promises. Pero nag-resonate yung build promise sa mga tao. And then, so when...
Build, na ang sabi ni Marcos, regional pa rin yung focus. Kasi I think parang somehow hindi natapos ni Duterte yung, yung ang development dadalin lahat sa regions outside of Metro Manila.
The federalism promise was also unfulfilled under Duterte.
So sa programs and priorities, ano ang inevitably ay mamamana ni Bongbong?
Definitely yung price tag of those populist laws, like the free tertiary education, that's like parang billions yan every year. Na nakapako na kasi may law, universal healthcare, may billions rin yan every year. And then we have the 13 trillion debt in the treasury because of the loans we took from the pandemic. So, those are, I think, biggest talaga financial burden And nakita natin in his first cabinet meeting, Marcos understood that economy would be his first go-to priority. And so, basically the financial burden of that. And siguro yung mga left-hanging na projects and well, definitely yung unity promise, parang those are things that he has to live up to pa.
Marami rin kasi siya mga lofty promises. Although kasi his lofty promises in the campaign felt very vague. And I think that was on purpose also. Ito nga yung insight na nakuha ko pa to from or I heard this first from a Filipino who was reporting for a foreign publication na the promises of unity, she compared it to Make America Great Again. It's so vague. to the point that you can impute whatever you think of it. Na parang what is unity to you. To the opposition people or people who are vehemently against Marcos, it connotes negativity, right? But if you're pro Marcos or pro Duterte, kasi parang lumped into one group sila in a way ng 2022, parang sobra siyang vague na promise, na any promise that you want for yourself, pwede mong ipasok dun sa unity na yun. Na na-capture niya actually sa inaugural speech, yung your dream is mine too. So,
Tsaka siguro yung reputation ng Philippines sa international scene na under Duterte, we were seen as an illiberal democracy because of his, parang strong man-like tendencies. The big question is, can a second Marcos return like our reputation as a better democracy than what we have now? And isa pa siguro yung China policy, di ba? Duterte, major blow yun kasi nakita natin, kinancel nga ni Duterte yung joint exploration with China, which is an indication that they gave up on the idea na we can work with China on this matter. So, di ba, parang it remains to be seen if Marcos can really fulfill his promise of, parang aayusin yung relationship and focus on other things aside from the...
Carry over yun ng friend to all, enemy to none. Pero
Very effective ba yun?
sometimes though I think na, I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing that he inherits that. Because again, parang, kasi nga ang gulo ng Duterte messaging minsan when it comes to foreign relations, right? So anything that he does now, again, parang kumbaga, magiging impressive right away. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for him. Na
Siguro even the diplomats, no, yung mga representative na ibang countries, sa kanila parang okay, back to zero tayo, pero okay na lang din to kaysa, how
as someone you can't,
they
difficult to
couldn't,
read.
difficult to read si Duterte.
But that's why the appointment of Enrique Manalo, I think, has made a lot of
Isa pa yun.
observers very happy. Kasi at least
Kasi
it's
career,
easier now.
Tapos, parang they worked with him before. They know how he does diplomacy. So, mas predictable. Which is what they all were hoping would come after Duterte. Because he was so unpredictable.
Yeah. Which also indicates what Marcos intends to do in terms of what, di ba? Na he picked, of all people, he picked the career diplomat. So parang, you see the direction that he wants our diplomacy to take na rin, in a way, I guess.
Pero merong mga ni-recycle si Marcos sa cabinet members ni Duterte. Good or bad?
Depends on the cabinet member. Kasi if it's Jose Calida, not technically a cabinet member, but Solgen niya, di ba? And tas nasa COA pa siya, Commission on Audit.
Exactly.
Medyo hindi siya very confidence building, I would say. Kasi with Calida being very, putting policies that were very anti-transparency, right? What can he do in the COA? Like, will he dismantle? Because COA has very predictably and parang regularly been doing COA audit reports. So, mawawala ba to under Calida? Parang anong policy exactly yung gusto ni Calida? But there are also naman certain cabinet members na inspire more confidence, like si Minardo Guevara, even if DOJ siya during the drug war, di ba? He was seen to be a bit more reasonable than his principal, and he would be clear on certain legal principles like yung arresting vaccine refusers. Diba? Talagang sabi niya, no, we need a law for that. So, kumbaga parang he can stand his ground on certain issues. So, I think people like that in certain appointees.
Teka. Yung mga reasons kung bakit may naging bad programs, policies si Duterte, are they present now? Pati yung the factors naman why, bakit nagkaroon ng good policies, are these factors present for Marcos now? Was it leadership style, a combination of factors?
Napapaisip ako dyan actually, nung nakita ko nga yung question na yun. Kasi parang, now that I look back at the 2016, May 2016, parang iba yung context ngayon kasi we weren't in the middle of an economic crisis. So to me, it's hard to, at this point, now that we're in the middle of Marcos's first week as president, it's hard to assess, are we in the same circumstance? But kasi the circumstances of Duterte led us here, but I'm not sure if...
Pico, two things. Duterte's personality trait, stubbornness. Alam mo talaga where he will plant his feet and not move. Like, yung mga pag-populist, about OFWs, talagang hindi siya gagalaw dyan. So, in a way, I'm not sure if Marcos has that same red line. Kasi nga wala siya masyadong nasabi sa campaign. So, ano yung red line niya? Ano yung mga unbudgeable niya? At the same time, the second factor would be, Duterte was lucky to have come after an Aquino administration that really gave him a lot of legroom, a lot of
strong
diba,
ang
parang
economy,
credit rating
oo.
natin, strong economy. So, marami siyang space to do populist policies. Kasi nga, may pera tayo, parang okay yung credit rating natin. You cannot say the same thing, Duterte leaving Marcos with di ba, 13 trillion peso debt, and then so many loans to pay, pandemic. So, iba.
Parang to add nito, parang kumbaga nga, Duterte created his own crisis in 2016, which was criminality na, ang talikim kasi hindi yun I mean, if I might be wrong, but the surveys, if I recall,
It's always
Economy
jobs,
economy dati.
yeah,
Pero
yeah,
nung
yeah.
nagsalita na siya na nagsalita, biglang tumaas yung crime, right? So, he created his own crisis leading up
tumaas
to his
yung
candidacy.
crime as a concern, hindi tumaas yung
Oo,
crime.
hindi tumaas yung actual rate, but he put it in the spotlight and he made it a campaign topic which the presidential candidates in 2016 could not keep up. Like Mar Rojas, Grace Poe could not keep up with that. As opposed to, in contrast to this naman, totoo talagang may crisis. Like hindi siya invented crisis, hindi siya spin lang or crafty political messaging. So it's a very different situation, like Pia said.
So far, yung priorities na na-mention ni Marcos dun sa kanyang inaugural was, building back the economy, food sufficiency, kaya siya nasa DA, energy supply, education, reform, the health system palalakasin, dahil nakita natin lahat ng mahinang parts during the pandemic, and infrastructure ni Duterte itutuloy. Sabi niya nga, di ba, big shoes to fill siya in that respect. And then, climate change. You were happy that he mentioned climate change among his priorities. Alin dito yung nakikita nyo na Marcos telling us na I'm my own person, I have my own programs and vision for this country. Hindi ito yung nakuha ko lang from Duterte that, would tie my hands about, I really have to attend to this, I really have to solve these things.
Yeah.
For me, sobrang medyo ballsy of Marcos to take on the agriculture department because it is very hard. It's a big promise that if you don't live up to it, siya yung madadali dyan. Kasi unlike other presidents, they could just blame their Secretary of Agriculture.
There's no one to pass the buck
on.
on.
It's you. It all stops with you. So, and agriculture is always doing so bad because of the neglected siya, and yun, daming typhoon. So even ang dami mong gains, yung harvest, ang ganda. Pero once a typhoon hits, bababa yung production, and it's not within your control, but you get blamed for the bad production, diba, that year. So I think that was really a message to the people na he will take on this extremely difficult portfolio and set high a lot of expectations. And kasi si Duterte, hindi talaga siya yung type to do that. Like, hindi, for one thing, agriculture, hindi talaga niya mag-grasp yung ganung kind of systemic, sobrang complicated. Ang dami kasi moving parts ng agriculture, di ba? And even if marami siyang in-adopt na agriculture agencies under OP, kasi he was concerned about corruption, walang nangyari. Like yung National Irrigation Administration, measly performance pa rin for 5 straight years, sinabi ng COA. Parang daming funds, pero hindi nila na-widen yung irrigation coverage. So that was already under Duterte's office, and he gave it to a retired general, si Ricardo Visaya, na akala natin na kasi obedience and like discipline magagawa daw niya, but hindi. As William Darr said, the fact that they had a learning curve to get over, right, just added to how slow that they could deal with this extremely urgent problem of irrigation, kasi that's all tied to production.
Anong impression mo kay Marcos during his first meeting with the agriculture officials, tas nag-press briefing siya right after, and you were watching this?
So, 4 minutes yung pinalabas na video from that long meeting. At from those 4 minutes, you can see that it seems he was able to absorb the presentations kasi gumagawa siya ng conclusions eh. Na parang, okay, from your presentations, I conclude that our priority should be increasing production, rice and corn. So, marami siyang mga documents katabi niya, tinitingnan niya.
Hirap siya mag-sort through it.
And then he was talking about things like RCEP and RCEF, which diba, Duterte might have probably parang interchangeable for him, but alam ni Marcos indifferent.
Or sasampalin niya na lang.
Okay. Or something like that. Or parang may feedback siya, na-process niya yung nangyari. And so ako, I appreciate that he, the first thing he did on that first Monday of his administration was to get to work and find out kung ano yung status ng kanyang portfolio. So that was promising, and I really hope that that bodes well for his next actions.
Sa akin, mixed bag yung cabinet first cabinet meeting, first of all, ang late nangyari. It happened on the, checking the dates, on the 5th. Akala ko happened
Fifth
ng
day
week.
niya na?
Wednesday pa lang pala ngayon. Pero fifth full day niya as president. That's the first time he convened the cabinet. And he's missing key officials. He doesn't have until now, walang
DOH,
walang
DNR,
DOE,
DOST,
DOST, DOE.
energy, which is supposedly one of his main priorities, right? Wala siyang HUD-C pa rin. And actually, we expected yesterday during the briefing in the palace
Na
yung bungad ay we're announcing a DOH chief. Wala pa pala. In fact, kanina nag-meeting siya with officials from the IITF, DOH, and PhilHealth, I believe, to talk about the pandemic and vaccination. Kasi nga wala pa siyang DOH chief. So which is interesting to me. That's why in the press conference, if you notice, when he talked about transport, when he talked the transport crisis, when he talked about COVID, it was through the lens of balik eskwela. The return to face-to-face classes, I think 100% na return. So, which to me now, it makes more sense din, baka din kaya din sa DepEd nilagay si Sarah. But it's also risky in that sense, di ba? For the vice president to take on such a huge department with intense expectations and challenges, not just because of the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, right? Like,
Tsaka biggest budget.
gosh, the DepEd is such a nightmare. Sa dami ng hawak mo, sa dami ng constituencies within DepEd, right? So, yun nga, parang doon ko na-realize kahapon na lahat ng yung lente na ginagamit niya to view major issues such as transportation and the vaccine drive and the pandemic was through the face-to-face, return to face-to-face classes. So, yun. Biggest frustration na walang DOH, hindi ko talaga ma-absorb ng ngayon.
Bakit kaya hindi na lang niya gawing parang DFA, no? Career officials yung i-appoint dito sa mga bakante pa na department.
I can't speculate because Malacanang also refuses to address yung mga political whatever. But we have been hearing a lot of names, especially for DOH, and even the other posts actually na mga nagpo-float na mga So hindi rin natin completely mag-grasp bakit ang tagal-tagal, considering na yun nga parang on top of syempre the economy is the number one priority, and it says so in the surveys as well, right? Even before the campaign period. But I mean, how can you recover from the economy when you don't have a health secretary?
Tsaka yung IETF chairpersons, dalawa lang yan Cabinet Secretary and Health Secretary. So wala yung dalawa.
Yeah.
So,
Correct.
so sino nag-head ng IETF ngayon? Wala man lang OIC, di ba?
Yeah. So
Kaya walang IETF resolution, and then to think that pretty soon dapat may new classifications ng alert level, di ba? Kasi every 15 and 30 yun dapat nag-change.
So parang ang weird na kasi parang diba the image and what he expressed also as inauguration is we will hit the ground running. Parang ganun, and not in that sense. They kind of did like in agriculture, for example. Medyo may hit the ground running tayo doon. Pero yun nga, parang until now, like, wala pa rin, the major like the key, at least two key departments. I mean, every department is important, but energy, health, until now, wala pa rin. So,
Mahanap na lang siguro siyang career, di ba?
yeah.
Ala DFA.
I don't know, it's so confusing.
Di ba, parang less adjustments din Parang they know
Yun
how
yung
the
mag-hit the
bureaucracy.
ground running,
Oh,
if
yun
ever.
totoo.
Yeah.
Hit the ground running. Pero noticeable na no mention sa kay Marcos ng drug war or the peace and order problem. Except for Benher Abalos, na yung first briefing niya as DILG, sinabi niya lang the drug war will be as intense as before. Pero it's really parang, you can actually look at that as yung posturing ng bagong DILG secretary. But coming from the president himself, peace and order is parang
True.
blanco, di ba?
And even in the campaign, they if they were asked, when I say Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte, when they were candidates pa, if they were asked, they'd address it, pero hindi sila magkukusa lang na mabanggitin yung drug war. I think it's also part of the strategy, and di ko alam kung deliberate to or parang instinctive na lang. Na yun nga, while we're continuity candidates, we refuse to carry the burden of Rodrigo Duterte, which is, di ba, parang yung controversies of especially the drug war, the thousands killed under the drug war. So parang very, very rare and very vague. Even Sarah, when she mentioned it on her own, well, actually, one of her, peace and order, parang one of the cornerstones of her promises yun. But if you ask her about the drug war, you notice na she's very, like, nung one time na nag-ambush interview kami, tinanong ko, ma'am, so anong ibig mo sabihin, drug war ba? Sabi niya, lahat ng law enforcement. So ayaw niya ma-corner into either defending the drug war, promising its continuation. So vague lang na law enforcement.
And the Marcos admin is getting away with that, yung pag-separate with Duterte. Kasi even the daughter, alam natin na she has her own mind, di ba? Kahit dati pa, parang kung kailangan niyang kontrahin yung tatay niya, kinokontra niya naman. So, hindi mo sasabihin na, ay, kunyari ka lang, fake ka lang kasi alam mong, well, hindi sila man talaga necessarily nag-a-agree ng tatay na Duterte. Ano yung mga pitfalls ni Duterte na pwedeng i-avoid ni Marcos?
Complete staff work siya na No, but true though. Diba? But I think that's something that we really missed during the Duterte administration. Like specifically with the president. I'm not saying na all his alter egos did not have complete staff work. But like, we expect that of any top government official na pagdating niya sa meeting, kailangan briefed ka, kailangan alam mo yung basics man lang na nangyayari. So,
Tsaka appointing based on competence, not proximity. Kasi yun yung challenge for Duterte, sorry. Na talagang loyalty was the most primordial criteria and governance really suffered for it. Like yun nga, NIA, PhilHealth, you put a former law enforcer to handle a company in charge of our state insurer. So
and that's one thing, no? It's the PMA, hindi na sila yung dominant masyado now. Kasi grabe talaga yung rise of the military and policemen. Diba?
Malalim ba yung bench ni Marcos? Yung pagkukunan niya ng mga... I'm thinking mababaw siya kasi ba't ka naman nag-recycle ng Duterte officials? Or yung mga nag-serve sa panahon ng tatay niya, syempre mga wala na or matatanda na.
I think that's what the irony was in the transition nga, na parang di pa dapat majority elected ka, pero bakit parang
hirap
ang bagal ng as compared to Duterte's transition period, di ba, na parang dinagsaan na ata ng resume.
May 31 pa lang, may cabinet meeting na sila. Unofficial.
Unofficial, yeah.
Gather all of his cabinet and
parang shadow cabinet na, di ba?
They had informal, nag-prep talk na pala sila.
But didn't we notice that also with Noynoy Aquino na yung initial weeks ng appointments? Ako lang ba yan? Na parang bakit nahihirapan din siya at that time na mag-appoint kasi parang hindi lahat nung nag-serve sa nanay niya ay andun pa or willing mag-serve. Pero mas matagal pa rin itong Marcos. We've never seen this na parang nag-take ka ng oath na totally all the major posts ay walang appointees. Ito yung mga issues na maaring Marcos avoided or has so far avoided discussing, pero hindi mawawala yung review ng yung ICC, International Criminal Court case. How do you think should he handle that?
That is so sensitive. Because if you're talking about the Davao death squad, the vice president is involved. I mean, diba? Syempre it was about Davao and she was mayor for many terms. So,
elaborate that
sobrang sensitive nun.
Elaborate that sa viewers natin yung Las Cañas affidavit mentioned Sarah kasi, di ba? Can you give a few more details?
Yeah, so si Las Cañas kasi parang siya yung self-confessed hitman who belonged to the DDS and sabi nga niya na the DTS actually operated in a shadow way within the City Hall itself. So meron talaga silang office doon, meron pa nga silang funds from City Hall. And of course, City Hall is governed by the mayor. And Sarah was mayor during certain parts of the DDS operations. So talagang there's a big question of how much she knew about the DDS operations, how much she allowed it or tolerated or at least, diba, put a blind eye na lang on the operation.
For context, Sarah was mayor 2010 to 2013. And then she abruptly left politics 2013 to 16 and then took over as mayor 2016 until 2022. So saklaw talaga ng ano. And on like beyond that, also just the awkwardness of her being the daughter of the person who's on top of the drug war na subject to an ICC investigation na ngayon, di ba, yung status ngayon. So, and then even in the campaign, well, first of all, hirap i-ambush interview si both now President Marcos and even Vice President Sara Duterte. Si Sara mas madali actually, in fairness to Vice President Sara, during the campaign. She was a little easier, but I think ang tendency, kung hindi nagpa-ambush interview yung presidential candidate, bakit
Hindi rin.
bakit naman magbibida-bida yung vice presidential candidate? So, damay-damay na yun. So, yeah, so it wasn't asked, not so much because the media didn't try, but it was hard to ask them that. And of course now, as sitting president and vice president, it's kind of hard to throw that question their way also kasi syempre, screen na yan and there's so many questions, policy questions especially, like in press conferences in Malacanang. So, interesting to see kung ano ba talaga yung stand niya doon. Babalik ba tayo? Papapasukin niya ba?
I think in one of his interviews during the campaign, sinabi ni Bongbong na pwede naman silang pumasok sa bansa, but anong gagawin nila? Parang in so many words saying, magturista kayo dito.
Pwede
Sige
silang
lang,
pumunta ng
but
Intramuros.
How about the case of Senator, now ex-Senator Laila De Lima?
I believe si Secretary Remulla I'm looking at Lian's story now.
I-review, sabi niya?
Hindi siya solid no, yeah.
Oo.
Parang kumbaga may open siya to the possibility of reviewing the case, which is in opposition, di ba, to Guevara's stand before na ayaw niya mag-budge.
We wouldn't withdraw the...
Ayaw niya mag-budge. So parang at least, yun yung parang, ko ba kung ano ba yun? Hope ba yun? Parang glimmer of hope ba yun in the context of the De Lima case? I'm not very sure.
Tsaka, it's interesting rin because yung case ni ex-Senator De Lima has reached international shores. I mean, for example, yung European Parliament is threatening to withdraw our trade perks with the EU, which is a huge, economy, a huge market for us. If si De Lima continues to stay in jail and even yung death penalty kung mapush siya. So talagang yung hamon nila kay Marcos was to, parang look at De Lima's case, set her free if talagang, kasi mukhang politicized yung kanyang case. So, the reason why Duterte doubled down on De Lima is partly because of the European Union being so, di ba, parang
ayaw niya nang tinithreaten siya.
Ayaw niya na sinasabihan siya na, do this, do that. So, si Marcos doesn't have that same baggage with the European Parliament, right? Yeah. So, baka mas, kumbaga, mas mag-work sa kanya yung tactic na yun. Kasi syempre,
what would he lose if he will set the limit?
Pero yun ngayon for me, yung pwede siyang advantage, pwede siyang burden on President Marcos. Yung ganung inheritance niya from Duterte, yung mga, I don't want to say sour, but tense relationships with certain groups, no? Parang he has the opportunity, if he gives them a little more space than Duterte, napaka-ano na yun.
Oo, napaka-generous.
Ay, ang galing. Di ba parang, he has inherited some space in that manner, the same way that Duterte did from the late President Aquino. Iba nga lang, ibang situation nga, hindi economic. Unfortunately for President Marcos, di ba? Sobrang iba yung the economy that he inherits from the previous president.
Last question, do you see Marcos working with the opposition? Hindi lang siguro the presidency, but yung Congress, civil society. Pagdating sa Congress, civil society, or maybe appointing people or experts na previously associated with the opposition. Do you see him doing that? Kasi si Duterte definitely ayoko. Ayoko.
And in fact, ginawa niya talaga mortal enemy yung activist, I mean, not just the activists, but the Makabayan Bloc, for instance, diba? From allies, cautious allies, so talagang na-demonize niya towards the latter part of his administration. There was speculation nung transition pa lang from Duterte to Marcos that there parang may people in the Marcos team who are very earnest about unity talaga. As in, hindi lang siya cheap na catchphrase, pero they really wanted siguro to, I guess, recruit even personally. The president never said this, President Marcos never said this, but parang may forces supposedly in the team na wanted to get siguro like quote-unquote dilaw personality siguro. But then you do have Balisacan.
Who was
Kinuha, diba? And there were rumors that he was trying to recruit some former officials of President Aquino. A lot of them turned down or siguro dito or nagkalabo yung discussions. So I don't know how I don't know, I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but at the end of the day, it's the political, economic elite circles that these people walk around in. For some of them, servicing the government isn't about a specific president. It's about government service or in their field of expertise. So we'll see if he can, kasi even though he's majority president, medyo ano pa rin controversial figure pa rin in a way, the current president, right? The baggage of his father and things like that. So, I don't know. In terms of like, yung practical, political na, will he work with an opposition? Will there be an opposition under President Marcos na totoo yung talagang...
or the previous opposition.
Oo, or parang, yung totoong opposition, when I say totoong opposition, bukod sa like legitimately fiscalizing or whatever, yung may say naman sila, hindi yung token decoration lang sila. Kasi yun yung nangyari under Duterte in both houses of Congress na parang they're there but they don't really, they can't even budge legislation they want to push, right? Like they're just there to raise their hands, mga ganun. So, I don't know, we'll see how, especially the leaders, the presumptive leaders of Congress in Representative Martin Romualdez and Senator Mig Zubiri, how they'll be managing their chambers of Congress also.
Pero caveat lang din kay Duterte, even if he was very vindictive towards opposition figures, on certain measures, they actually work together. Like marami siyang sinign na mga bills na in-author ni Rizzo Ontiveros, like yung solo parents benefits and then yung Safe Spaces Act. So, pag same wavelength kayo, he can work. He might not even know that.
That was the opposition.
You can get things done if parang same kayo ng wavelength and priority. So maybe President Marcos would have the same belief that at certain issues that are very urgent, you can set aside politics.
But wasn't he known for that also, even in Davao nga?
Yeah,
like,
yung Magna Carta for Women.
Yeah, very progressive.
Na hindi niya sinusunod.
Progressive siya in his legislation, in his policies. Yung implementation, well,
old school pa.
mixed bag.
Thank you, Pia, and thank you, Bea, for joining us today. Duterte and Marcos, they are the most popular presidents after EDSA. Duterte stepped down with an approval rating of more than 70%, and Marcos assumed the presidency with nearly 59% of the votes. And the former's popularity undoubtedly paved the way for the latter's victory in the recent presidential election. That level of popularity was high enough for Duterte to have rallied the support of people behind right causes, but he may not have done so all the time. It's Marcos's turn now with how to use his popularity, and hopefully he will use it to shepherd the country away from the shadow that was cast by his predecessor. Marcos, after all, campaigned on the slogan, "Sama-sama tayong babangon muli," acknowledging that the country needed picking up and rebuilding, however popular its leader had been. I'm Miriam Grace Go. Thank you for watching Newsbreak Chats. See you again next time.